Thank you. Yes, Governor John Bel Edwards going to join us this morning. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
I know it's up early, but a lot to get to. We're going to get to the flood here in a little bit because that continued recovery is so many thousands of people still dealing with that. But it really does begin and end with the budget and everything at the session right now. Here we are in another special session. So let's talk a little bit about the budget. Where are we right now? The sticking point, the millions of dollars that we can't agree on that's holding up a $25 billion state budget. Where are we?
Well, it appears that there's still some members of the House who would rather not appropriate all of the money that's been forecasted by the Revenue Estimating Conference. Clearly, I don't think that's the smart thing to do. We came into this session needing $400 million additional revenue just to have a continuation budget and provide the services we provided last year. Didn't raise any revenue, and then to leave it on the table, I think would be a serious mistake. For the first time in a decade, we have the opportunity to fund higher education without a cut and to fully fund top. We need to do that. We need to make sure that we also protect our Department of Corrections, the Department of Children and Family Services, and there's still an awful lot of cuts in the budget that came out of the Senate. But it is a responsible budget under the circumstances, one that I can support. But those cuts are especially deep with respect to the Department of Health, and they're spread across the entirety of the budget, really. So it's a responsible budget. But you talked about the flood. The two things are related. Last year, obviously, we didn't appropriate money for the flood, but we spent $250 million. So to leave $100 million, $200 million, whatever they're talking about unappropriated, that money is not available to us for any purpose. We would actually have to have a special session to go in, appropriate the money, and then allocate it, for example, if we had to respond to a disaster. And never in the history of our state have we left recognized, forecasted revenue unappropriated. I think it's a big mistake.
With the deep cuts that higher ed and healthcare have taken over the last number of years, not cutting them, I think, is nobody wants to see those cuts happen. Of course, they understand as well forecasts are not guaranteed, and so that's the argument from the other side as well. Is there a compromise that's going to happen? We've got until Monday with the fourth special session we've seen here.
Well, I think a compromise is going to happen. I had a pretty good conversation yesterday with some leadership from the House. I've been talking to the Senate as well over the weekend and into yesterday. Look, it has to happen. It's called House Bill 1. It's the first order of business is to pass a budget. Come June 30th, all of our authority to run government goes away without a budget in place. So I think we're absolutely going to make it happen. But look, forecasts are wrong, just like your weather forecast here is wrong sometimes. But it is the system we have, and the REC itself, the Revenue Estimating Conference, is a reform, because there was a time when the governor and the legislature just decided how much money that they anticipated coming in. So we've already adjusted the revenue to accommodate the forecast. In fact, we adjusted it down another $27 million for next year. So, and the other thing that people should understand is last year we went into the new fiscal year and Jay Darden and I, the Commissioner of Administration, instructed all the executive branch agencies to adjust their spending to accommodate any revisions we had to make to handle a shortfall. And in fact, a shortfall materialized. We were able to handle it because of what we did. We can do that again this year. We've told the legislative leadership that we were going to do that. Now, we do expect that the entirety of state government would participate in any shortfall.
Well, I think, as you mentioned, the forecast to come for lawmakers, and even our guys in the First Alert Storm Center could tell you, will be absolute anger and vitriol aimed at lawmakers if they cannot figure this thing out. Let's talk a little bit about the bills, though, that have made it to your desk. HB 1, not one of them, but things from police reform, criminal justice reform, dealing with the opioid abuse problem. These are bills that have made it to your desk. What is it you're going to be doing with them in the 10 days you have to sign these bills or veto? Well,
I've actually signed those bills that you just mentioned. I think they're very important to reassure the community, not just in Baton Rouge, but around the state, that we're doing what we need to do to make sure we have the best possible law enforcement community out there, to make sure when it comes to criminal justice, we actually had the largest look at our criminal justice system, the most detailed look ever in the history of our state. We then made some changes because we're an outlier in the nation, spending over $700 million this year on the Department of Corrections to have the highest incarceration rate in the nation, while we're not the safest as a result. So using strategies proven effective elsewhere around the country, but particularly in the South, we're going to make sure that we are saving money lowering our incarceration rate, and reinvesting those so that people can re-enter society successfully. Every time someone gets out of jail or prison, and 95% of the inmates are going to get out, if they are unsuccessful, then there's another victim of crime created. And so this is about combating crime as well as saving money and just doing things better. It's time to stop being tough on crime all the time and start being smart on crime. And we're headed in that way. I'm very proud of the bills that passed. I have not yet signed the criminal justice reform bills.
Right.
Those will be signed soon. But in terms of the police reform bills, those bills that make sure that we are going to be training law enforcement officers, for example, at posts with more hours dedicated to conflict de-escalation, making sure that police officers who run into trouble aren't able to just resign, show up at another police officer without anything ever surfacing. All of that should give some more confidence, I think, to the public that we're doing some things in Louisiana to address this situation.
From that to the conversation of the flood, here we are about 10 months from that historic event, and there are people right now who maybe just at this point are figuring out how to get walls put back up. The conversations that you are having with those in D.C. are what right now? And I actually asked you earlier, maybe even the conversations that you're not a part of, meaning that other people are still aware that we have a problem down here. What are you hearing?
Well, just last month that we got our third appropriation. It's about $51 million, a very small appropriation. Not much we can do with that, but we do appreciate it nonetheless. The next opportunity we have is going to come up in the September timeframe when they put together the budget. Hopefully they'll actually have a regular budget coming out of Congress. Right. That'll be our best opportunity. We're still working with the administration, with the leaders in Congress, and certainly our congressional delegation. But the recovery program is ongoing. And I'm encouraging any homeowner out there who sustained damage, whether they think they're eligible or not, to go take the survey and determine, because the more information we have, the better we're going to be to stand that program up, to get it completed. And it's well underway now. Checks have already started going out for reimbursement claims. We've got individuals who are able now to hire their own contractors, bring them in, or they can opt to allow the state to control that process for them. So there's three main options right now for homeowners, but they've got to take that survey as a first step.
I would absolutely encourage everybody to do it. I knew very well that I was not going to be eligible for any kind of money coming from the federal government, but it wasn't about, you fill out that survey, you let the federal government know exactly the numbers involved down here, and so that increases potentially the pool that we have access to money-wise, help-wise. What are the odds that we get that next $1 billion? But it really does rely on this survey and people getting involved.
Well, you know, I don't want to lay the odds on it, but I like our chances because we know that we had a favorable reception from the Trump administration. We know that leadership in Congress, both Republican and Democrat in the House and Senate, they're listening to us, and our congressional delegation is fighting very hard as well. So I like our chances. But we also need to get some funding from Congress for some infrastructure enhancements. You know, this is the first time in modern history where you've had a disaster this big that required this much money for housing, for example, but the federal government didn't put more money into making sure that we don't flood again next time. So getting some infrastructure enhancement money would be critically important. You know, for example, with the Comeet River diversion.
Talk a lot about it.
We really need some help there.
That has been decades talked about, decades on a shelf somewhere, just one of the many projects that need to get done. So much more we could get into, but I know that the time is